Good evening. Happy New Year to everybody. I'm David Levine. I'm co-chairman of Science Writers in New York. This is my third year of doing these broadcasts with Joe Bonner, who's my co-chair, and he's behind the scene, and he's the person who operates this, sends out the invitations, puts these broadcasts on YouTube, edits them down. So I want to introduce my guests. So I'll do them in alphabetical order. The first is Jason Bardi. He's a journalist and NEO.LIFE editorial director, and he's my editor, so everyone be nice to him. Julia Calderone, who's the editor at the New York Times. Alan Henry, special projects editor, Wired magazine. He's also the author of Seen, Heard, and Paid. Luba, okay. Can you pronounce your name?
Sure. Ostashevsky, Luba Ostashevsky.
We have Luba Ostashevsky, agent for Ayesha, Pande Literary. Pronoy Sarkar, senior editor at Little Brown and Company. And Susan Shapiro, who really brought this idea to me. She's been my guest a few times, and she helped get most of the editors. She's an award-winning writer. She's a professor and best-selling author or co-author of 18 books that her family hates, including the Book Bible and the Byline Bible. So thank you everyone for being with us. It's a new year. And there are a lot of people who sign up for this, over 300. So a lot of people want to get published. So, but first I'm going to ask you just really briefly, a minute or two, just to say who you are and a little bit about your outlet or where you work. I'll do it alphabetically. Jason, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, so NEO.LIFE is an online magazine started by Jane Metcalf 5 years ago. Jane is the founder of Wired magazine, co-founder of Wired magazine back in the day. We're a general audience publication online, and she's been trying to do for human health what she did for digital technology back in the 90s. And so we cover a variety of things. We're very eclectic, very interesting. I invite you to check us out at NEO.LIFE. And I'm open to pitches if anyone wants to send me things. And yeah, as David mentioned, he publishes there, and I enjoy working with him. I am also an author. I've written 2 books, and I'm working on a 3rd right now.
Okay, Julia?
Yeah, so I'm an editor on the Well Desk at the New York Times. A little clarification to my title: I'm not the Well editor. I'm one of the Well editors, so I'm not the only one. I edit most of our health and science articles, reported articles, not so much personal essays. I also edit our Scam or Not and Ask Well columns, and Well is primarily a service publication, just how to live a happy, healthy life. We are open to pitches. We have, a bunch of staff writers who write a lot of our stories, but we do take freelance pitches. So health and science for me.
Okay, and for those who want to pitch these people, if I will get that information to you. Alan.
Hi, hello. Yep, my name is Alan Henry. I'm the service editor. Well, geez, I was a service editor. I am the special projects editor at Wired now, and I am still the service editor until I find someone to replace the old me. But I focus mostly on packages, big swings, and kind of things that Wired as a publication wants to tackle in a kind of cohesive way. Podcasts, our strategies for new platforms, things like that. But I also take pitches for our service desk, which is all of the standard how to make sense of technology in your life, how to make your technology work better for you, and all of the intersections between technology and lifestyle that entails. And let's see. Oh yes, of course. I also run Wired Games. So if there are any video game fanatics in the group here, I also take pitches for that. And yeah, I also am responsible for building kind of our cohesive list of great freelance contributors. So by all means, get in touch, because if any of those packages do come down the line and suddenly I need someone to write about, I don't know, nanotube meshes in hip transplants, then I would love to have somebody who can talk competently about that, so I don't have to pretend.
Okay. Luba?
Hey there, everyone. My name is Luba Ostashevsky. I'm a literary agent with the Ayesha Pande Literary, and I mostly focus on popular science, wellness, some historical narratives, but usually everything inflected with science. And I just want to show you some of the recent books that are published. So I don't know if you can see. Taking the Heat by Bonnie Schneider. So Bonnie Schneider is a meteorologist at MSNBC. And this book was published a few months ago by Simon Element, which is a new imprint in Simon & Schuster that focuses on wellness. And this book kind of blends climate change and personal health, kind of to give people an idea of the ways that climate change is impacting not just the environment, but kind of the very air we breathe, how we sleep, how we eat. So everything at the personal level. Another recent book that came out is called The Other Dark Matter. And the author there is Lena Zeldovich. And this book is really prescient. So it was published probably like a year ago. And it's all about the business of turning human waste into usable products. So it could be fuel, it could be medicine, could have lots of different applications. And since then, I have to say, I have seen poop everywhere. I feel like it's really just hitting a high note, becoming more and more popular. So I like to think that we had something to do with that.
Well, Lena was my editor at Nautilus when I wrote for them, and
She was my student. That's how I met. That's how I met Luba.
Yeah, we all have the Nautilus connection going on. Yep.
And she's been on the show about talking about her book.
Yeah, she's awesome. That book is beautiful.
Here in spirit.
And the last person is Susan.
Did you go to Pronoy?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, because I'm
Right, sorry.
looking
I'm
S-A-S-H.
Okay.
Hi, everyone.
Go ahead.
Thanks, David. My name is Pronoy. I'm an editor at Little Brown. Little Brown is the prestige imprint of Vichette Books. We are a relatively small team with a small list of books. We, among our more well-known authors, Malcolm Gladwell, Michael Connolly, James Patterson. James Patterson is so successful, he actually has his own subdivision called James Patterson Books, publishes close to 20 to 30 books on the team, completely dedicated to him. We also have there's the Little Brown General List, which is a general interest both in fiction and nonfiction. And we have sublists, Mulholland Books, which does thrillers, LB Spark, which does lifestyle and health. We have Voracious, which does cookbooks. And I'm one of the few acquiring editors for nonfiction, doing history, science, politics, and journalism more broadly. I have some books here, some science books, one of which was picked for a Nautilus Best Of, called If Nietzsche Were a Narwhal, What Animal Intelligence Reveals by Human Stupidity. This came out last year. This book comes out in 2 weeks, Jellyfish Age Backwards, Nature's Secrets to Longevity, with a glowing review from Robert Sapolsky, the famed biologist. And this hilarious, quirky book called Edison's Ghosts, The Untold Weirdness of History's Greatest Geniuses, which has some great chapter titles like Lord Byron, the patron saint of fuckboys. The author is a mathematician, and she has found these stories that are never told about the great men and women of the Western canon until now.
Okay. And now, Susan.
Cool. Thanks, David. Happy New Year, everyone. So I'm a writer by day, and I write many things, my books and essays, my family hates, as you mentioned. And by night, I'm teaching, and I've been a professor at NYU, the New School in Columbia for 25 years, and I specialize in helping people get published. I call my writing method the instant gratification takes too long method, where the goal of a lot of my classes is to write and publish a great piece by the end of the class. And most recently, I've been doing Zoom classes, which are really exciting. And I think I've had in the past 10 years, students have sold 170 books with advances between $1,000 and $500,000. And if it's $500,000, instead of saying congratulations, I say fuck you. And then I say congratulations.
Okay. So for people listening, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box and we will get to them. We had a few advanced questions, and I think one of them was interesting. Well, a lot of them are interesting, but so how has book publishing been affected by the pandemic? I know that, okay, so before I did these interviews on Zoom, I interviewed authors in the New York Public Library and at a private patron's home. And we just did authors. And then the pandemic started and publishing houses really weren't open. And authors also weren't so eager to publish books when they couldn't go on book tours. So that kind of changed things a lot. A lot of publication dates were pushed back. So who wants to field that question?
Well, I'll jump in first because I'll give the optimistic
Okay.
background, and then everybody could give the more realistic. I will say that I think from everything that I've seen and read, that more books are being bought and sold and read over the pandemic. And I've actually had incredible luck. I've had 4 book deals since the pandemic, and I've had many more students that are publishing newspapers and magazines, maybe because a lot of my students, including 15-year-olds, undergrads, grad students, have gone through so much fascinating traumas during the pandemic, whether it's getting sick or not getting vaccinated or having to move or whatever. So I think it's actually an amazing time for writing and publishing. And I think, and we can ask the agent and the editor, I think there's certain genres that have been doing better and certain genres that aren't. And I think it's switched around. For example, I've had a lot of luck, and students of mine have had a lot of luck with kids' books. Maybe when there were a lot of kids were doing remote learning at home, and I think memoirs have been more difficult. I think an escapist fiction has been easier. So we'll ask Luba and Pronoy specifically about the books. But I think it's a fantastic time. And I think that it's amazing that if you look at the numbers, books are up. In fact, the pandemic actually reinvigorated Barnes and Noble, and they're opening new stores all over the country. So I take it as a really good sign. Maybe it was because people couldn't go out as much, or there wasn't as many distractions, and they remembered that they love to read and that reading is something that everybody could do. Luba, what do you think? Are you experiencing that too?
Yeah, I can take that. I mean, book publishing is exciting because it's always changing. Some things are up, other things are down. What I noticed during the pandemic, so as kind of agent that's trying to sell science titles, I felt like it was a little bit too close to home, trying to sell anything about kind of bioengineering or medicine. There definitely was more of an escapist feel, like people didn't want to hear about COVID. They just, not at all. But at the same time, on the upside, people were really into games, into any recreational things. So for example, I have a book coming out with 10 Speed Press in the spring about how to win at chess. Which, is getting a lot of advanced praise. We really, we concluded a very favorable deal to us. And I don't think that would have been possible before the pandemic. I think like chess was sort of a dusty game that maybe your uncle played. But during the pandemic, it was people were all in. So that's my take.
Pronoy, are you seeing, have you had books that are bestsellers that you didn't expect during the pandemic?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll step back before getting into a personal thing and just say, you know, I think since 2020, March of 2020, we have seen across the industry, especially the big five, certainly higher margins and bigger growth across major categories that have broken, just from a pure business perspective, records that hadn't been seen in many years. Conversely, though, a lot of that had to do with the fact that many of the businesses' bottom lines, office space, expense accounts, lunches, meetings, these things were all taken offline. Publishers weren't investing in things like physical galleys, which take up costs. And those things actually contributed to better overall margins for the business. On the other hand, the thing that I noticed, I see it quite a bit, and I've seen it with my books as well as some of my authors, is that one of the things that I think became kind of almost habitual was that it became a winners take all situation. So brand names, recognizable authors who had platforms or audiences prior to the pandemic actually maintained or surpassed their trajectory during the pandemic. So for example, in our case, someone like Ellen Hildebrand, she's been having the best years of her publishing career despite being a best-selling author because of that name recognition. Whereas breakout or debut authors, where there needs to be much more of a planting of the seeds and setting up, it's become a little bit harder because some of the more traditional pathways to doing those things, author tours, appearances at bookstores, and even the ability for consumers to just walk through and browse books has become more and more challenging. Meanwhile, places like Amazon have, you know, for good or for ill, really algorithmically pumped books before consumers and sold certain books like Atomic Habits, for example, doesn't follow any of the traditional metrics of what book publishing should be capable of doing. It's selling, you know, or like a Colleen Hoover, which is now like breaking through and single-handedly carrying fiction as a category into uncharted territories. So I think in one hand, you step back, it looks quite good. On the other hand, I think it's been very challenging for authors who don't have the sort of institutional or support systems. You know, for example, I have a lot of authors who work for the Times, who work for the Post. Those institutions are quite powerful and they can do the work that's required on the behalf of the writers. But others, you know, who don't have those kinds of institutional support, don't have the more traditional paths to get to readers. And I think we're seeing those authors suffer in a way that, you know, things like, for example, generating an early reading campaign to get people to read novels. I mean, I think a lot of first-time novelists have suffered from not getting the kind of awareness campaign that they would have gotten if they were able to go on an indie bookstore circuit, for example. And as these businesses have reopened, they've also been much more conservative in terms of the buying. So we've seen a lot of accounts like Barnes & Noble, for example, take less books than they would have otherwise, and been making decisions in terms of table placement that, you know, they're giving it to people who you wouldn't necessarily expect to get otherwise, you know, an Ellen Hildebrand, a James Patterson, whereas people who were trying to break out, new stars, new talent, are having a harder time. So I think, you know, both things should be weighed and taken into account. But yes, I think overall, as you know, books have not suffered from the pandemic. People have been reading, people have been finding books, and people have been continuing to do so.
Yeah, also, David, if you don't mind, I'd love to find out from the editors who do newspapers and magazines. It's my impression newspapers and magazines have done extremely well during the pandemic. Julia, I'm reading very good things about numbers at the New York Times, right?
Yeah, we seem to have been weathering the storm pretty well. We've made some big purchases in the last year. So, our freelance budget has been the same, if not bigger, since before the pandemic. So yeah, we're doing okay.
Yeah, and Alan, you got promoted, right? And it seems as if Wired's doing great, right? I mean, you took tons of freelance work from students.
Yeah, in fact, I mean, if anything, I mean, I guess maybe it's a little early to say that, but like, we can't be doing that bad if they could afford to bump my salary and give me a new job. But also my freelance budget did go up for 2023, right? And so that is an optimistic sign that like some of these things are some of these headwinds are in our direction, although most everybody is all like, no, be careful, don't, economic headwinds, challenges coming in 2023. That's the party line. But yeah, people are reading things more, which is nice.
And also you with your book, Seen, Heard, and Paid, that was a debut, right?
It was right there.
Yeah, and it was, if you don't mind, I love hearing that it was based on an article that you published, because I always say to my students that it's so much easier to publish 3 pages than 300 pages. So that started with a piece you did for the New York Times.
Yeah, I mean, when I was at the New York Times, I was, dearly departed Smarter Living, which I don't think is a thing anymore. But when I was there, Smarter Living was kind of a service semi-vertical that sat across multiple desks. And I wrote an article for the Times on what to do if you feel like you're being discriminated against at work. And part of it was based on, my own experiences, not just at the New York Times, but at a number of publications and places that I've worked in the past. And sure enough, the beauty of having a platform that is as big as the Times to write your story means that literary agents are reading those articles. They are seeing those stories as they pop up. And it was within 2 or 3 days that I had emails from an editor and an agent saying, hey, would you like to talk more about turning this into a book that can help people? So yeah, it was a great success story.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Jason, how's your publication been doing during the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I think that our traffic is up, and that's a story that, from what I understand, is true industry wide. There has been a lot of interest in science and health related topics in general.
So I want to ask some, I see that people have asked questions and someone's been answering them.
I've been answering some of them in the
Yeah,
Q&A.
I mean, some of the questions are like, how do I pitch the well column that's in there in the email, and I'll summarize these and put it on the website. But there are some basic questions, and I would like to ask, and one is, if you're not a well-known writer, and you write someone and they don't answer, what do? Do you follow up a week later? Do you follow up 2 weeks later?
Yeah, by the way, so in Byline Bible, because I've taught people how to publish short pieces for 25 years. So there's a bunch of sections. So first of all, you have to make sure that you're pitching the right person, that it's the right column, that you've read it before, that you know that it takes freelance. For example, Modern Love, if you Google, you'll find out they take all freelance. They're 1,500 word pieces. They could take 8 months to get back to you. They pay $500. So a lot of columns are like that, where you could look up specific information and find out. So make sure once you have the right editor, then some editors want to be pitched and some editors want the whole piece. Part of the reason I like in my 5-week my 5-week pitch class, I'll bring in 15 different editors because every single one is different. So you have to find out how they like to receive material, and you can absolutely follow up. Some editors say, for short pieces, follow up in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, depending on how timely it is. And it's a little bit different story with agents, because every agent's going to have a different way that they want to be pitched. Luba mentioned that she's on Ayesha Pande's website, how she likes to be pitched, and agents can take 6 months, but there's also, there's really easy ways to follow up. And I have students every single term that are breaking into the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, New York Magazine, New Yorker. So they're absolutely all open for freelance work. So, and I have students that have never been published before that their first clip is a major clip. So that happens all the time. So if you're not hearing back, you might be doing something wrong. You might not have the right email address. Maybe you're not pitching something timely. Maybe you're pitching something obvious that they already have. So there's a lot of ways that one could learn how to write and pitch better and to get critiqued so that you could, I mean, classes are great, writing workshops, you could pay a ghost editor, so there's a lot of ways that you can improve your writing and your pitching, I think.
All right, someone asked a basic question, what's a typical advance for a nonfiction science environment book?
Luba.
I knew I'd get that. It really varies. It's very hard to like throw out numbers, it could be 10,000, it could be 100,000. It really just depends on the marketability of the book, the platform of the author, how the in-house editors see it, what the sales potential is. So
one general question I want to ask you is, do you want a detailed pitch from a person? Do you want a very short pitch? You want a person just to introduce themselves? What should a person do when they first? So I'll ask Jason, because what should a person do when they first want to publish in your magazine? How should they introduce
Right.
themselves?
Yeah, I mean, for the first thing I would say to understand is that we're getting pitched all the time. We're getting pitched not just from legitimate writers, but we're getting, for every pitch from a writer, there's probably a dozen unsolicited pitches from PR people and things like
Right.
that. So there's just a flood of stuff coming in. So if somebody doesn't respond, please take it with, be patient and give us time to respond. And I always try to give a legitimate response to every pitch that comes in. And also just understand if we reject a pitch, right off the bat, it's often not because it's a bad pitch, but because it's not right for us, so we're really focused, our magazine, for instance, is focused on human health, the future of human health. And so, technology as it relates to human health might be something like robots that are injected into the human body. That might be a pitch that I would be interested in. But if you're going to pitch me a story about a robot that's making its rounds in the hospital, that's probably not a pitch that I would be interested in. Purely a robotics story. Wired might be interested in a story like that. Sorry, I don't mean to pick on Wired for that. But the point is that I think that each editor, each publication has a real specific remit of what they want, and to the extent that you can figure that out, and the more that you work with an editor, the more that a publication, the more you'll learn that. But my advice would be really the more time you can spend kind of researching, thinking about in advance of reaching out, those kind of questions, the better off you'll be. So simple things like look and see what we've already written about, what our writers have already covered, and how your story, your pitch is going to build on that. Think about what's already out there in the universe and other publications, and how your story is different. I mean, I don't think it's unique for us to say we want something that's totally different, totally new. I think that's pretty standard for publications. Nobody wants to publish something that it's a me too. So those are the kind of things. But I would say, really, to answer your question, David, a simple short article. A simple short email introducing yourself. This is who I am. This is my idea. Or it could be a long pitch. I like to see things like, who am I going to talk to? I like to see things like, it's a story, not just an idea. I don't want somebody to send, I do like ideas that go beyond press releases, that go beyond just a paper coming out. It's more of a topic, but I don't want just the topic. I'm covering. I want to go to the CES conference this week, the Consumer Electronics Show. I want you to actually tell me, I'm going to the Consumer Electronics Show and I'm going to go to this booth and talk to this person because they have this product coming out. That's the kind of specificity I'm looking for. Otherwise, I'm just going to respond and say, that's great, but what's the actual story?
Should people include links to things that they've written? Does that help you?
Yeah, I mean, it's helpful to have, a sentence of bio, I've published here or there. That's useful for me to just get a sense of who you are, because like I said, we get pitched all the time, not always by writers, often by researchers, other people. So it's just good to get a sense of who you actually are, who we're dealing with. We do publish perspectives sometimes by other people. So I want to know kind of exactly what I'm dealing with when I'm reading a pitch.
Someone asked a good question. Should I be encouraged?
David, why don't we get all the information from Julia and Alan too? Because I know they take a lot of freelance work.
Okay.
So Julia, you like pitches, right?
Yeah. So if you're pitching just a reported article, a pitch is great. Keep it short. If you put in the subject line freelance pitch or writer pitch, that will help me to weed it out from PR pitches. And then one really amazing thing that you can do that will get you far is if you come up with a headline. Coming up with your own proposed headline helps me to understand what your story is, and also helps you, I think, to sharpen your pitch and to understand what your story is. So come up with a sample headline, and then I really beg writers to keep it short, no more than a paragraph, really. You don't need to spend the first intro introducing yourself. I would just say, do a sample headline and then write the pitch as if you're writing the lead to your story. Hook me in the first couple sentences, and then tell me what the story is, why you're the writer to write it, why it's a good story for who you're going to talk to. A lot of all of our well stories are heavily reported, evidence-based, and health and science stories require a lot of reporting. So I just want to know that you have the chops to report it out. And linking to some other stories that you've done that are similar on the topic also helps me to see that you've done a story like that before.
And Alan, you like pitches also, right?
I do like pitches, and I do tell everybody that, give me a week and I will reply to you. And I mean, I don't give that to PR people because that's their job. They get paid to send me an email whether I reply or not. But for freelance writers, I will get back to you and I will let you know whether or not this is a fit for us or not. And I generally try to explain a little bit why. But just to piggyback on what everybody just said, like Julia and Jason are both absolutely correct. Everything they said applies to me as well. The only thing I would say that probably applies to me a little bit more is one, remember that you're pitching to a magazine that likes to bill itself as your guide to the future, right? So if you're pitching me a retrospective on something, it's probably not going to be a fit. If you're pitching me on a frontier technology or a new technology that is going to develop in the future, talk to me a little bit about how that technology is going to develop and why it's meaningful that we talk about it right now. The only other thing I would suggest to people is tell me a little bit about why you're the writer to tell this story, right? Why is it your story to tell? Because that always gives me a kind of a window into why you want to write it, what you're passionate about, and how we can tease that out in the eventual piece that may actually kind of make it more relevant and digestible to your reader. And it gives me a head start on what I would eventually have to do editing your story anyway. But that's just an added tip.
And I'll just throw out that there's a lot of my students who get published by writing an entire piece first when it comes to a personal essay or an op-ed, and then submitting it. So for example, Modern Love is one of the best ones that's led to a lot of books and podcasts and the TV show, whatever. So 1,500 word Modern Love, most of the op-ed page is the big one. So it's the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the Boston Globe. You can't pitch an op-ed. You just have to write the entire piece, anywhere from 500 to 1,200 words, depending on which publication. And for a lot of essay columns, you just have to write the whole full essay. You can't pitch the idea of an essay. So you have an alternative, which is if you have an expertise or some amazing idea, you could pitch somebody like Jason or Julia or Alan, you could pitch them an idea. But if you have no clips and you have no background doing this, sometimes just writing an entire essay or a personal essay or an op-ed is easier. Just because, you know, like, for example, during the pandemic, I had many students whose first clip was, I got COVID twice and I still can't get tested, or they threw me out of my dorm and, you know, I'm living with 7 people in, you know, in a small place, or I can't teach my kids remote learning. A lot of people did personal stories. And Luba, when it comes to, somebody wanted you, because a lot of people are writing that they want to send you their books. So if somebody wants to send you their proposal, first, they should have a completed proposal probably before they contact you.
That would be great. So the way that it works is at my agency, there's a submission form that they would fill out. And in the submission form, they would give me a pitch, maybe like 3 paragraphs or so about the thrust of the book, what makes it different from other books in the marketplace, who they are, why they're the right person to write this book. And then sort of lengthier space, bigger space for a lengthier introduction that gives me a sense of their writing. So I would say it's okay if they don't have a full proposal, but it probably would help to have a full proposal in order to produce a really convincing 3 or 4 paragraph pitch and an introduction anywhere from, you know, I don't know, 5 to 10 pages that could really convince me that this is the book to take on.
Good. And Pronoy, I'm under the impression with big publishers that people need a literary agent, right? So you don't necessarily want authors sending you their work. You would prefer to get it through agents.
Yeah, I mean, we generally don't have, I mean, most of the big 5 operate this way, unfortunately, but unsolicited projects are just not something that we pursue with any frequency. I mean, what usually happens, and in cases where I have, you know, if I had read Alan's piece and was interested, I mean, I've certainly reached out to authors and writers that I've enjoyed. And in the case where they're unrepresented, I will find them an agent. So I put them in touch with someone. But I certainly don't recommend navigating, especially the big 5 publishers, without a representative who has your best interest at heart, especially because, look, when you're communicating with an editor, a book editor, especially at the big 5, and I'm not talking about non-profit publishers or academic presses, which have different guidelines, but, you know, they're, and I can explain this if it comes up. I know there's one question specifically about how advances are calculated, but, you know, we're really operating with many factors in mind. And if you want to have a long-term career and, you know, you get dropped after one book for any number of reasons that you particularly don't find convincing, you really want someone there to help shepherd the next steps. And to do all of that yourself is just, I don't recommend it for anyone.
I have a question that someone asked me. How do panelists react to pitches from writers who aren't on social media? Is that anything that you even?
Alan, what do you think if somebody's not on social media? That's funny.
It is funny. It's kind of a bummer, but I don't mind. I mean, in general, what we like to do is we'll try to promote your social media as well. So like, you know, every time I get a new writer, and I work with a lot of new writers, so don't hesitate to pitch me if you're like, I've never written before, but I'd like to start. Because I mean, I'll help you out. I mean, I can't help you out. I mean, I can't promise I'll give you money for words, but I will at least entertain the idea. But yeah, it's not a problem. I know a lot of people who are not on social media for safety reasons, for harassment reasons, for a whole number of reasons, and other people just don't like it. It's fine. It's not a requirement. It can help if you feel like rolling a Twitter account or something just to promote the story that you're writing for me. Great. But if you don't, that's fine too.
There's a writer with my name, David Levine, who writes for USA Today, who has no social media presence. And I would say 3 or 4 times a week, I get a query saying, we'd like you to do an article on this. And I say, I'm because we read your article that you wrote. He also writes about health. And I said, I didn't write this article. Then someone said, well, would you like to write this article? I said, well, okay. I have no idea. I don't know how to reach this guy.
That's fine. Julia, do you care if someone's on social media? Does the New York Times care?
No, it's absolutely not a requirement to be on social media. We understand that there's many reasons to not be on, especially now. That being said, I will, when I'm working with new writers, I do Google you. I do look at your portfolio. I look at the clips that you have online. If there's not much that I can find on you, I'm just going to be asking you for more evidence of what you've written. So just know that we do look you up when you pitch us. But no, if I see that you're not on social media, that's not going to stop me from working with you.
Jason, do you care?
Yeah, I think that it's we feel pretty much the same way. It can help you a lot, I think, if you have a huge social media following. That's a big boost, to your case to pitch a story. But it's not going to hurt you if you don't.
Luba, what do you think in terms of if somebody's pitching you a book? Because like I have a student who refuses to be on social media and he just sold a book. Hilariously, he found one editor at Simon & Schuster who hates social media too, and they kind of bonded. But doesn't it make it more difficult for you as an agent if someone's not on it?
Well, it really depends. I think it depends on the topic of the book. So again, dealing in the popular science market, sometimes you'll be working with someone with a very specific expertise in a particular field, and they have so much to give and so much, a story to tell about that, that whether they're on social media doesn't really matter. However, I have to say with journalists, so I'll work with, scientists, health professionals, and then journalists. But I feel like if you're working with journalists who are doing more of a survey and who themselves are doing research and an investigative piece, I would be really surprised if they weren't on social media. So I think it depends who you are and what you're doing.
Pronoy, does that influence you if an agent sends you a book? If somebody's not on social media, does that make a difference?
Yeah, so I this comes up a lot, and so I think my answer to this. So I think that it's a sort of terrifying prospect for a lot of aspiring writers to think of social media and platform and all of these things as a sort of zero-sum game, and how do you incorporate that into your writing life and what you're doing creatively. I think that what I like to say is that you kind of want to shift the perspective a little bit. I think it's a little more important to think of putting aside the craft and the work, that the publication process of it, whether it's writing articles or getting book deals, is you should think of it more entrepreneurially. I don't necessarily think that if social media should be some people are very good at social media and they're not great writers. I mean, there's a lot of people who are terrific, they go viral all the time, but they're not necessarily people who are followed for their writing abilities. In fact, there's a lot of great writers who don't have any social media presence or have left social media. I mean, Ta-Nehisi Coates famously has disappeared from social media. He's a terrific writer. In fact, he was so disappointed by social media, he left before everybody else left. Gia Tolentino, terrific writer, not on social media. So I think at the same time, there's been plenty of people I've seen who have been given hefty amounts of money because of massive social media followings, only to find that nobody really wanted to read their book because they're really good at tweeting and they're just not really good at narrative writing. So I find it far more engaging and interesting to cultivate relationships and with writers you admire. There's a lot of story writers, for example, who somehow, for some reason, come across George Saunders, and George Saunders will support and endorse their story collection, and they took a class with him, and then he will write a blurb. I think that's far more impressive than having 5,000 Twitter followers. Ed Yong is very generous with his time, and he supports young writers who, we published a young writer who wrote a series of essays connecting animals and identity, and actually Sabrina Imler, and it's a marvelous collection, and they have Ed, who has been a big supporter of their work for many years, and I, they are not someone who is out there maybe promoting themselves aggressively on social media, but they have developed a network and a community of people who have come to support them. I think those connections are far more potent and powerful. I'm publishing Rick Perlstein. Rick Perlstein has a bunch of super people that he loves that are not as well known as he is, that are not, anywhere have reached the level of success, but he will do everything, stop everything to support them should they come forward. And I think those kinds of connections, connecting with writers that you love. In fact, I was just talking with my colleague who discovered Edith Perlman, who just passed away, and her obit was just in the New York Times. And he had actually written to Anne Patchett to write an intro. And it turns out Anne Patchett was a super fan of Edith Perlman before she was ever known. And he couldn't offer her much money to write an introduction, but she said, "You don't have to give me any money. I would pay you to introduce Edith's work." I think those connections, those endorsements, that support is far more practical from a craft perspective, from a community perspective, and from I think that is a better way to build a platform entrepreneurially, is by connecting with other writers within the space than it is to just ginny up social media metrics.
One thing I've been also interviewed over the last few years a lot of researchers, and they want to write books, but they say, "I'm not really a writer." So what should they do? Because they have an expertise that a lot of people don't.
David, I've co-authored 5 books. So if somebody's not a writer, but they have a great story or a great idea, you could hire a ghost editor, you could hire a ghost writer, you could have a co-author. Like right now, I have a book coming out that's the story of one of the police officers who almost got killed during January 6th. He's a Latino who is a Latino veteran who was a sergeant, and he's not a writer, but he had an amazing story. And I also did 2 books with a Bosnian War survivor. So you have a lot of options. I mean, I personally would say to people, try first, because, as I mentioned in my classes, I mean, writing a 500-word or 1,000-word op-ed piece, if you have something smart to say, usually isn't all that difficult, especially if you read the publication like the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post. If you read a lot of op-eds, op-eds are really not very well written. They tend to have like a good argument or a good expertise usually. So it's not that hard to start. But if you say you write an op-ed and you want to keep going, but you don't know how, if you don't want to take a class, you don't want to learn how to do it yourself, then absolutely hook up with somebody that could help you. People can email me, profsue123@gmail.com, if you want to find out how to get a ghost writer, a ghost editor, or a co-author. There's a lot of easy ways to figure that one out.
You said before about you get a lot of pitches from publicists. I imagine some publicists, have good ideas, or they have good writers. Should a writer consider ever hiring a publicist?
Alan?
I'm sure there are better answers for like the book world, right? But for freelance journalists, I don't necessarily think there's any intrinsic value in hiring a publicist to pitch me a story that you could pitch me. Besides, I mean, if I have questions about the story, I don't really necessarily want to go to the publicist and then back to you. Sometimes it'll raise my kind of red flags about like, are you connected to the subject matter that you're writing about or something like that? Like, is there some kind of conflict going on here? In fact, I've had bad experiences with people who are freelance writers in one world and are also publicists in another world, where one of their worlds tends to leach into the other, and I have to kind of pull them back in their copy and be like, you're writing like a publicist. I need you to write like a human being. And like, not the publicists aren't human beings, but you know what I mean. And so maybe not for journalism, but I would love to hear the answer to that question for book writers, because when I wrote my first book, I got a lot of pitches for publicists who are like, we can help you. And I would love to know if they could have.
I have hired freelance publicists after my book is sold, 6 months before it comes out. That's a thing. Because what happens is, even if you're with a good publisher, sometimes they don't have that much time or effort or money. They're doing hundreds of books. So there's been a few times where I've hired someone, and in one case, it was amazing. Like, I had a first novel coming out, and the person who was at the publisher, I could tell he just didn't get the book. He just didn't understand it, the head publicist. So I hired someone I knew was fantastic, who I'd worked with at Random House, who went freelance. She got me on TV 7 times for a debut book, which never happens. So I would say the biggest benefit is, if you have a book coming out, and if it's a small press, or you fear that the big publisher that you're working on doesn't seem to know what to do with it, then you can hire either a company or one book publicist to help you. And sometimes you have great results, but sometimes, they can't guarantee anything. So you have to decide if it's worth it. Luba, do any of your clients hire freelance PR?
They haven't yet. No.
Pronoy, do you care if an author comes and mentions it? Is that a negative? Like, would you rather that they just go through Little Brown, or sometimes does it supplement the PR?
So I've had multiple authors hire outside PR, and in every case, the book has been a bestseller. I would say that basically there's a few ways to think about it. One is, some of the publishers are quite large in terms of their volume, and so the amount of attention that a publicity or marketing team can give a title might be less than the author or the agent would expect. In other words, you have 2 weeks, and if in those 2 weeks certain things don't happen, there'll be less attention given for a 6-month thing. That's one case, but that's not necessarily the reason to fork over outside PR. What I think is the main distinction is, the in-house publicity and marketing teams are really there to publicize the book. Yes, Alan is an expert. Alan can go and speak and can write and do XYZ, but really they're pitching Alan's book. An outside PR person is pitching you. They can come in and find opportunities for the author that an in-house publicity and marketing team would just be unable to do. So for example, I published an Economist. We were doing a book on the future. The in-house publicity and the publicist was terrific. They were finding opportunities for the book. We had it reviewed. We had him booked on various television programs, etc. All tied to the book's pub date. But the outside publicist was looking for opportunities in the public space. When were interest rates going up? Oh, we have a debt ceiling issue. Where do you need an economist? And they would call and say, hey, I have an economist who can speak to the debt crisis. I have an economist who can speak to the student loan crisis. And then they would say, okay, we need that. In exchange for what? Well, you should say he's the author of. That's it. They're just pitching. They're looking for opportunities, and especially for academics, it's very helpful because they can just go out there and they can become these sort of expert voice, and all they need in exchange, the publicist in exchange will say, you just have to say that they're the author of the forthcoming this, and in exchange they'll be able to provide free commentary. That's something that an in-house publicist would not necessarily be able to do. They have Google alerts for your name, but they're not able to watch television and say, okay, well, I'm going to plug, Chris Hayes is asking a question about COVID, and I have someone who can just go in and plug and play. An outside publicist, that's literally what they're doing every day, is looking at where they can plug their client in. And that's outside of book publicity specifically, and that's where it becomes very essential. So I would say that it's really helpful when you have something beyond simply the book to offer. So if you're writing a memoir or one of those things, I mean, an outside publicity is just a cost that you probably don't need to pocket. Whereas if you are a science writer, or you're doing something that you might actually have other ways that go beyond the book in terms of commentary or expert analysis. Like if you're someone who you're an economist, or you're a biologist, or something that you can contribute to a conversation that is ancillary or outside of the specifics of the book pitch, that's where an outside publicist could come in and plug you, and in exchange they'll be able to plug the book. And those are opportunities that are unorthodox to, or outside of, but gets you that kind of exposure that a book publicist in-house would not necessarily be able to get you.
David, any final questions?
Yes, there was actually, I thought it was pretty intriguing. I'm not going to talk about the G chats and all these things, but someone says, I'd love to hear thoughts about the future of publishing, both book and articles, with the recent explosion of artificial intelligence, somewhat successfully creating art and writing. Any thoughts on that?
People always, like, I've been doing this a lot of decades, and every year there's poetry's dead, fiction is dead, books are dead, and they're never dead. In fact, they get more exciting, I think, and proliferated. So I'm not particularly worried right now. Anybody else?
No. So
Yeah, I agree with that. It's, the Monty Python said it well. I'm not dead yet. I'm not dead yet.
Okay. So I just want to do some publicity of my own. Sue Shapiro is going to be at the Strand Bookstore in New York City, Monday, January 23rd.
Actually, it's online. We're doing it with the Strand online.
Oh, it says, I'm sorry, online secrets of publishing.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Well,
Thanks.
and tickets are $7.55 or a book purchase. And if you go to her website, which she has put in there, you can, right, so they can find it. Sue?
Yes, I'll do that. And if anybody wants to, if anybody has any questions, it's profsue123@gmail.com. So I quit all my other addictions, so now I'm addicted to email. So I'll be happy to respond. Where do I put it? In the chat?
You can put it in the chat, or
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat. That's easier.
yeah, and I can also, when I can also just put in, I can send it out to our members. I'll probably just do that. I'll send the announcement out to our membership. So anyway, I want to thank everyone for.
Wait, can I ask one more question, David?
Of course.
I love to ask everybody, like, what's the most exciting new thing you have happening? So I always like to end on a really happy note. So Alan, are you doing more events with your Seen, Heard, and Paid?
I am. I did a lecture at my alma mater not too long ago, which was fantastic. I'm giving another lecture for, I think it's like the Federal Housing Administration or something like that in February, which is also great. So yeah, what started off as a book about my own personal experience has become kind of a world tour of DEI and ERG kind of related stuff in plain language, which is a lot of fun. So yeah, it's working out great for me.
Cool. And Luba, aside from Lena's book, which is amazing, the other Dark Matter, which everybody should buy, do you have anything else coming out that we should check out? What was the chess book you mentioned?
Yeah, that's coming out in May.
What's it called?
2023, How to Win at Chess. So if you've been watching the Queen's Gambit, if you've been playing chess during the pandemic, definitely check this out.
My student, Sari Kane, has a chess memoir because she was like a chess master.
Oh, cool.
A sex, drugs, and chess memoir. So she wants to contact you. So
Sure. Sounds great.
Yeah. Pronoy, what's your new hot book that we should go buy?
There's too many to mention, but I will say that one book I am excited about that I just signed up, and it'll be coming in early 2024. I won't say buy it on Amazon because it is going after Amazon. It is called The Everything War, on how Amazon has ruthlessly gained market leverage over everybody and destroyed everything in their wake. And she's the main Amazon reporter for the Wall Street Journal, and it's going to be a Barbarians at the Gate type book, but for Amazon. And I just want to say that this book, If Nietzsche Were a Narwhal, I came up with it on a napkin, and the agent was talking with someone who lives on a farm in Nova Scotia, and he took the idea and ran with it. And we didn't offer him very much money, but the book has been a bestseller, and he's getting a hefty royalty check in a few months. And so rejection, I can tell you, is part of everyone's life in the media world. I have pursued many books I can't buy because of the people around here. I have turned down projects from Luba that I've very much enjoyed and wanted to publish, and we all deal with it. And unfortunately, it's just a part of the experience of being either on either end of this. So stick to it, because it's just a part of life, but that doesn't mean it's not in no way a personal standard of who you are and what you're capable of.
I had 30 rejections from agents and 30 rejections from editors to a book that wound up selling to Random House, and I did 3 books in a row for the editor. 30 rejections from editors, 30 from agents, and then I found like the most fantastic person in the world. Jason, what are you up to? Are you working on a new project yourself?
Yeah, I'm happy to say on a personal note that at 11:30 last night, I submitted the final proposal for my 3rd book to my agent. I had given him a draft earlier in December, and he gave me some feedback. So this is it. We're going to start shopping it around this month.
Good luck. Fantastic.
Thanks.
We get to hear the title, or is it a secret?
Well, you'll have to wait for the next Zoom for that.
Okay. And I have all kinds of really exciting panels and online classes and seminars. And if anybody, I'm addicted to email. So if anybody wants to email me if you email me at like 3 in the morning, I'm always answering all my emails. So propsue123@gmail.com. Anybody could email.
So I interviewed Carl Zimmer for the World Science Congress, which was based in Dubai. And it was virtual, but because of that, I got invited to speak at conferences in Lahore, Pakistan, and in Cape Town, South Africa.
When is that, this year?
Yeah, unfortunately, I could not go to Cape Town because I had COVID. But the Pakistan one, I decided just there's a lot of warnings not to go to Pakistan right now. So by the State Department. So I'm going to heed that. But anyway, but it does give you some great opportunities, and I've been asked to just doing things. You get asked to speak about all kinds of things. So it's good to be out.
Publishing a short piece. I always say to my students, 3 pages can change your life.
Yeah.
I never had anything more exciting in my life than publishing seeing a first piece or a big piece come out, even if it's like 3 pages, even 500 words, it's so exciting. And it's so worth trying, because there's like 20 stupid little factoids you have to understand. And once you get it, it's not that hard to do. You have to read the publication, you have to understand the voice, you have to start timely or do something new, but it's so exciting when it happens.
It is. Well, anyway, I want to thank everyone for spending time with me tonight, and Science Writers in New York, and thank Joe for
Happy New Year.
And Happy New Year, and may it be a very healthy and happy year for everyone, and fun. And
you have a tape of this if people want it, right? You've taped it?
This is being taped. We will post it on our website, and we also have a YouTube channel. So we have, I don't know, I've been doing this for 5 years, both in person and the last 3 years on Zoom. And I look forward to doing them in person as well. So anyways, thank you so much, everyone. It's nice to meet all of you.
Thanks, everyone.
And,
Great to see
stay safe
everybody.
out there. Okay, good night.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Happy New Year. Thank you.
Happy
Bye.
New Year.
Yeah.
See you later.
Bye-bye.